Hello, everybody. Welcome back to episode number 31 of the Faith and Whatever podcast. I am your host with the providential most, Josh_Carmen on Twitter is where you can find me. I'm joined, as per usual, with Jamothy Ewell. He's at James YUILE on Twitter.
Not my name.
Chris is at Marion Ranch, and we are Garrett-less tonight, but you can still connect with him on T Student Life. We have a very special guest in studio. I know he looks like a better version of Garrett, but you'd be surprised they're actually not related. He is a professor at a local university called Hope International University, and his name is Dr. Kip Lines, and so we're super excited to meet with him. So just would love to have you introduce yourself a little bit, give us a bit of a rundown and kind of some insight as to who you are and what we're going to be talking with you about tonight.
All right, great. Yeah, I'm, like you said, a professor of Intercultural Studies, and my wife and I served as missionaries in Kenya, northwest Kenya, close to the Sudan-Ethiopia border for about 9 years with a mission organization. Did all kinds of things while we were there. After those 9 years, we came back to the States, and one of the ways I talk about it is I say that I went back to school to figure out what I did for those 9 years when I was in Kenya.
Okay, so what do you mean by that? Unpack that statement a little bit for us.
Well, I went back to school, and I was invited to come into a PhD program at Asbury Seminary in Intercultural Studies.
I wish I got invites like that.
Yeah.
Barely get invited to people's weddings, let alone PhD programs.
I guess it happens once in a while.
To Kip Lines.
Yeah.
Okay. I won't tell you what I turned down. No. I think a lot of times after people serve overseas, you're very idealistic. I mean, it takes a very idealistic person to think about the fact that you're going to pick up your family, move to the other side of the world, and you're going to do something that's life-changing in this place that you've never been before, right? So there's a lot of idealism. There's a lot of thinking that you have the answer to the problems in a certain place, and then you get there and you realize that you're don't
not bringing
have
the
all
miracles.
answers. Yeah, even though people keep expecting them from you in that place, and maybe even your supporters, right? And so you go through this process of thinking, what am I here for? What am I really doing here? Is what I'm doing actually doing any good in this place? And so really some more critical reflection on that when I came back and went back to school helped me think through that. And hopefully, as I'm now teaching, it's going to help students think through that, students that are interested in those sorts of ministries, cross-cultural ministries, either here locally or far away. So
Go with the right expectation.
Right, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of good and bad things that have happened in mission history, and we don't need to repeat the bad things.
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yes.
you served in Northwest Kenya, Ethiopia, Sudan border. What was your favorite thing over the 9 years that you were there? Or what's one of your favorite things about Africa, Kenya in particular, besides snakes?
Yeah,
Or spiders.
No.
What was that? We can't hear you,
I
Chris.
can't hear.
I heard your
Hippos
mic
are
is
the
down.
most deadly.
Hippos are pretty cool. Hippos, water buffalo actually, even more.
Are they really hungry? These hungry hippos?
Not if you give them enough marbles.
Or does
All right,
everybody
so-
own a water buffalo? That was a VeggieTales reference, guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Bringing it.
that was a VeggieTale reference. No, I think the best part of living in Kenya, the thing that I was converted to was a more a holistic way of thinking and a holistic lifestyle. So our family, we have two boys. Our oldest was 1 year old when we went to Kenya. Our youngest was born when we were there. Once we moved back to the States, we realized we'd never have the kind of time together as a family as we did when we were there in Kenya, because it part of the culture is people in the community hang out together. You go to church with, you work with the people that you are living in close proximity with all the time. So everybody knows everybody, and everybody's taking care of everybody, and that aspect of community we don't experience here very often.
Yeah.
So that's one of the best things I think of living in Kenya that I came back with. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So the discussion we were going to have for this video was, so there's I go to a church that's local to here. We'll leave it nameless, but they are very passionate about sending their people on short-term mission trips all around the world. some a little closer to home, others very far, such as Africa, such as
Mm-hmm.
Thailand, such as Chile and things like this, where people go for maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks if it's very far. They usually do a couple of tasks, complete a couple of things, like maybe wells or a home or something like that. And they probably take with them a bunch of resources that they've collected for this trip, leave those resources there, and spend some quality time, at least quote unquote quality time, with people around the region they're visiting, and then come home, come back to normal American life, right? And I've always wondered about what's the actual effectiveness of that form of mission. I understand the heart, but I'm not questioning the heart behind it. But what's the reality of it? And you're a person who's probably, because of your time spent, you've seen those people come, spend their week or two, do their tasks, and then go home, and then maybe had to pick up with the leftovers there with whatever whatever was left behind. And I want to know from your position, from your angle, somebody who spent many years in that context and saw a lot of groups come and go. What's the actual effectiveness of that? Is it a useful thing? Is it a useful use of resources? Does it achieve what we expect? What's your thought?
Wow, those are two really different things. The achieving what you're wanting to affect, and even the usefulness of resources. We might have to talk about those separately. But,
Sure.
In general, I hate to give this answer. There are good things and there are bad things about it, right?
Okay.
But the huge growth in short-term missions in the last decade, I think, has had more of a negative effect in many places than it's had a positive effect on the work of, if you want to talk about it as the work of the gospel or the kingdom of God or the mission of God. It's just tremendous growth, and a lot of people go without preparation or understanding what they're getting into.
Okay.
Because there was so much growth, there are a couple ways I'll talk about it. One way I would talk about it is that it became so popular that it became a business model for some organizations. So you had a proliferation of organizations in the mid 2000s, like 2003, 4, 5, that were only serving groups who wanted to go do a short-term mission trip.
Yeah. So I'd imagine this is sort of the equivalent. I'm not going to name names, but there's a group that a business, a non-profit probably, that exists right on the border between America and Mexico, and helps people do like weekend trips into Mexico to build a house or something.
Right.
So it's kind of similar to that, right?
Similar to that, but what was happening was, so before, really the huge spike in short-term missions happened about 2001, 2002. And people who studied it said it's just a tremendous spike. So tremendous. It went from probably on average the U.S. sent 20 to 30,000 people a year on a short-term mission trip in the late 1990s into 2000. I was in high school. I graduated from high school in 95. That tells you how old I am.
Okay.
I never went on a mission trip.
Right.
I mean, that wasn't a thing. Nobody did that. And so the U.S. was sending about 20, 30,000 people a year on mission trips. About 2001, 2002, there was this sudden surge of, I don't know what combined to cause this, but by 2002, there were 400,000 that were going out on mission trips a year. And then that increased to 1.5 million by the time you get to like 2008, right before the Great Recession.
That's when I graduated high school. It was 2008.
Yeah, so you probably went on a mission trip in high school.
Yeah,
right.
several.
Yeah, and so there are organizations like what you were just talking about that served groups that wanted to go into Mexico and plant churches that had long-term relationships or build houses in Mexico. Right. They had long-term relationships with churches, and they were doing that work and continued to do that work. But during this surge of people wanting to go do short-term mission trips, other organizations popped up that didn't have connections with local people. And it just went crazy for a while. And so that's my first big critique of short-term missions. If people want to go on a trip and they're going to do something, if they're doing it with an organization that's not really connected with a longer-term mission or something that's going on the field. They're just participating in something that's benefiting themselves and maybe the organization that they're participating in, but it's not benefiting the larger community in that place where they're going.
Okay.
So that's what's happened. That's one of the negative things that happens with short-term missions. People want to go and feel good about doing something, like they're making a difference in the world.
Be Jesus for a week before I go back home.
Right, exactly. But they go and they really can't communicate. They don't really know what's going on. Maybe they connect well with a bunch of children for the week, and it's a lot of fun.
A lot of photographs.
They go home, and the language.
Picture.
Yeah. Have you seen Barbie Savior? Have you seen the Barbie Savior film? Okay. The language that people have when they come back home was that it was a life-changing experience.
For me. Yeah.
Right. For me. Right. And then the stories that they tell are about how terrible it is for those poor people that they met. And that's the only view that they have of it. And often this short trip, it reinforces the stereotypes that they have of people in another part of the world. Yeah, they live in these dirty houses and they just can't take care of themselves. And if it wasn't for us, they wouldn't have ever heard about Jesus.
I gave somebody his first Nikes.
And
I've had Nikes since I was 2. He finally had Nikes.
Let's not talk about Toms yet. Are you wearing Toms?
No.
No. Okay. What's fascinating? The anthropology professor at Wheaton College. His name's Brian Howe. He did an ethnography of short-term mission trips.
Okay, what is an ethnography for those of us who are
all right, ethnography is a bunch of research methods, mostly qualitative research methods where you do participant observation. So if I wanted to study nurses, I wanted to do an ethnography of nurses, I would go to the hospital and hang out on the floor and go to the places where the nurses hang out on their breaks and talk to them, learn the language that they use as they're using words in different ways than I do. And then I would use all these interviews and different types of research methods to come up with a written description of who they are that would help us understand who they are and what they do. So Brian Howe he decided he was going to do an ethnography of short-term mission trips.
Awesome.
So he went on a bunch of short-term mission trips with his church as an anthropologist, not just as someone going on a trip, but he participated, and he listened very carefully to the language that people were using when they were on the trip and also when they came back. And over and over again, the language was, this was life-changing, it changed my life. But when he followed that up, 3 months later and 6 months later and a year later, what did it mean that it was life-changing and it changed your life? There was very, very little long-term effect on the person, the American, who had gone overseas on a trip. They still felt good about what they participated in, but it didn't change anything. Like when they first come back, they said, "Oh, now I understand what it's like to live with less, so I don't need to live with as much." But very few people made any kind of significant change.
It almost seems like the better term here, it's eye-opening. Their eyes were opened, but that's all, right? That there's no actual life change.
And the potential is a church community could capture that and do something with it, but churches don't.
Right.
They don't know what to do with it for a long-term effect in their own faith community.
Would you equate this with something along the lines of like poverty tourism?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the things. We call it poverty tourism, or what are some of the other words that we use?
Explain that, by the way,
vacation,
poverty tourism.
Mission vacations.
Yeah,
we talk about that. But
I mean, this idea of going to see poor people and see how they live with this certain set of an agenda, right? To be able to I don't know. I don't even know if I would even go to say it's as deep as like the white savior complex or the messianic complex, because I don't think it's that even well intentioned, even in a different sense, but like just a chance to go and see what a different part of the world is like for the simple sake of you doing that and then using missions as a vehicle, I think is how I would define poverty tourism.
So here's a criticism I've heard before, and I'd like for you to comment on this criticism, either how correct it is or, in your opinion, how misunderstood it is or whatever.
Right.
Misunderstanding it is. I've heard that, so you have, like, let's say a group, they're going to go to a village in Africa somewhere, do a bunch of good, right? And so what they do is they spend a few months collecting, like, food, shoes, shirts, clothes, all these resources. They go on that trip. They spend, like, 2 weeks, kind of riling up the community in a positive way maybe, but still, like, kind of just sort of, like, kind of disrupting the community. When they give all those resources, that it's actually harmful in the sense that a bunch of people get free things, which not everybody is going to complain about, of course, but the person who was selling shoes nearby loses business for months, and the people who were selling shirts lose their business. The people who would have been hired to dig that well that they dug don't get hired now in that village for a long time. And what ends up happening is we actually just put out a bunch of local businesses and create more poverty and desperation by disrupting their economy.
Right.
And then we leave feeling great about ourselves with a bunch of photographs. And what we've done is we actually create a much deeper problem in the wake of all of our energy.
Yeah.
What do you think about that criticism?
I think that's a valid criticism, and it's connected to what I was saying before, that if you're not going on these mission trips connected to something that's long term, and there are people that you're working with and hopefully working under when you arrive that understand the local economy and the local history, you're going to make these sorts of mistakes. I mean, we talk about this in charitable giving and social service organizations, even in America, that just handing things out to people isn't always the best answer. I mean, it gives it takes care of immediate needs sometimes, but in the long run, it's not a long-term solution. So yeah, I witnessed what you were talking about, where groups would come in and give away free food in a community where there was somebody, a local person in the community that had set up a shop and had actually borrowed money in order to get the capital to buy the food to bring out to this local hut that was the store for this local village. And a group of 20 Americans came into the village with a couple truckloads of food. They were there for 1 week, and they just dumped the food in the village, and they sang with the church leaders, and everybody was happy because all of the food had been handed out. But the guy lost, no one bought food from this guy for over a month. He lost his capital in the business that he had borrowed because everything went bad before he could sell it.
Would it
So that happens.
Would it be a more effective strategy? Of course, I'm an amateur. I don't know any of this stuff. But would it be a more effective strategy for that same group, instead of collecting resources, collect usable funds, liquid funds, go to experience community, and then as they're there, make sure that people in that community get hired to do the work that they wanted done, and that they infuse the economy and the workers there, and they're only there just to visit and to make sure that those contracts get set up, and then head out.
I think that's a little better, but I still would want that to be kind of overseen and run by folks in the local context, whether it's missionaries or nationals in the local context. When an outside group comes in and says, this is what we're going to do, we're going to set this up and it's going to be great, you guys are going to love this, and it's going to help your village, there's so many things that go wrong with that because they just don't have the insider knowledge that's needed. So my advice to people going on a short-term trip is always link up with a group or a national church or missionaries who are there long-term that you can work under and fit in with what they're already doing instead of just coming in and doing your own thing and then leaving the mess behind. We would have to set up, I mean, a lot of missionaries on the field, so I was on that side of receiving short-term missionaries.
Give us a ballpark. How many teams did you work with in your 9 years?
Well, it was during that real influx of short-term mission.
I don't know whether to say that's awesome or apologize.
Well, it was a strange thing. So we arrived on the field in 1999. Short-term missions was increasing in popularity, but not a big thing. A couple of years later, we got an email from the person that oversees church relations in the mission organization that we worked with, saying to us, the reality is the churches that support you, if they're going to continue supporting you, want to come on short-term mission trips. They want to send people. So this is maybe something you've not thought about before, but on the missionary side, you're compelled to do it because you need the support. You need the continued support. So I want them to be involved. And we were told as missionaries, expect that a third to half of your time now is going to be taken up with planning, preparing for, and hosting short-term mission teams. So that's pretty significant, right? And we were all like, that'll never happen. And then we just got request after request after request. And what we said as a missionary team, we worked as a team of
We're
folks in
booked.
that
We're
in
just
that
booked
region.
all year long.
What we said was, as a team, you can only host 3 groups a year. That's what we agreed to as a team, kind of to try and set some boundaries so
protect
we
your
could
guys'
do
spiritual
the
well-being, too.
work that we felt like we were called to come do.
Right.
Because the churches didn't realize, they were going to come for 10 days, but they wanted to do something, right? So they wanted to do a project. So we would set it up so they could build a church building, or they could build a clinic, which we needed, or they could build an extra classroom at the local school, which was needed. But it would take us 6 months to get all of the supplies, right? And then we would have to hire local folks to do like the foundation work. So when the Americans came in, they could do the project and get it to almost a completion point before they left. Because that was really important too. They wanted to finish it. Right? It's hard not to be real cynical about this.
No,
right?
yeah.
Right? But that's what people want to do. They want to actually finish something. And then they would leave, and then we would have to hire contractors and local laborers to come and actually finish the project, and in some cases have to kind of redo the project a little bit, fix it, in order to get it to what it was supposed to be. So there's a lot of resources. It's not just the amount of money that people are spending to go on these trips, which by the way is estimated at about $2 billion now a year.
Wow. We are in the wrong business.
Yeah, right. But it's also the resources of these long-term folks, which it's actually expensive to have a long-term missionary on the field who's educated and prepared to do this work, and they've spent a year or 2 years learning language.
Yeah.
And now you're sending them a group of high schoolers to do this project with for a week. Yeah.
And I know you're too polite to say this, but I can fully imagine that then you have the megachurch pastor who you've been working with, who thinks he can do it all himself at some point. He's been bringing these groups over for a couple of years now. I'm not really sure if I need Kip Lines, right?
Well, and that's what happened in recent years. People will just get on the internet and find a church somewhere, anywhere in the world where they want to go, and find the pastor and email that pastor.
And that looks good.
Yeah, and the pastor sitting in this village in the middle of Kenya goes, "Yeah, come on over."
Yeah.
Right? And there are a lot of mixed motivations for that to happen.
Yeah.
They don't like necessarily all of this stuff that's going to happen in their village. Kind of becomes a spectacle, but they know there's going to be some resources that'll show up with that, and potentially a longer term relationship.
Yeah.
And that's what, I mean, now for me, the real negative aspect that I saw in short-term missions on the field was the friendship and the way different cultural understandings of what friendship is, and the way that had a negative effect on the local villages that we were working with.
Mm-hmm.
So you imagine a group of people who have always lived in a village setting. Everybody knows everybody. No one has really gone very far from the village, right? And it's a very close-knit group. We're living in that setting, and we have very close relationships with these folks. A group of Americans flies in, and they come and visit the village, and from the American perspective, I can be friends with someone for a week while I'm here, and we can be great friends.
Yeah.
And then I can go back to America, and maybe we'll write, maybe we'll do Facebook once in a while, but I can live with the fact that I was a great friend for that week, but I've got other things I'm going to do now. And we segment out our life.
It's the spring break friendship.
Right. Yeah. Right. And we're pretty good as Americans at segmenting our life into all these different compartments. And that was my mission trip friend, and that was my, what happens is in our village we found the first group comes and all the people in the village loved it. Oh, we've got these great friends now, and some of the friends were writing to them, but then the communication stopped, and then another group came and the Americans all acted like, oh, we're your best friends and we're here to help you and love you and care for you. Yeah, and then it would happen again, and the third and the fourth time, and what happened eventually was a group would come and people in the village weren't really interested in hanging out with them.
Yeah.
It's just going to be another group of Americans that's going to come in and then leave, but there's not a real relationship. I mean, if you were really my friend, you're committed for life to this friendship. You'll come back and visit me again. You'll help me put my children through school. You'll help me when there's a a drought and my animals die, you're going to be there to help with that. That's what a real friend is. And the American version of friendship is not that.
Right. It almost underlines our unhealthy friendship notions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that, and there's a couple helpful things that I do to help people understand this, especially college students. You know, again, we're idealistic and we want to go help in the world. And I would say, I love that you want to go do that. But let's say the next time you go to the doctor's office, you show up at the doctor's office and you're waiting in the exam room. The nurse opens the door, and it's not your doctor, it's a high school student. And the high school student says to you, I'm here with my church youth group this week, and we're here to take care of the practices here at this doctor's office this week, and we're going to help you out. Just let me know what your problem is. And everyone goes, no, it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. But the reality is, when we send long-term mission folks over, we're expecting them to study culture, anthropology, language, to learn culture and history, and to be inside that culture as they're working as partners with people. And then when we send short-term people over that just don't have that knowledge,
right.
Another way of thinking about it is, would we accept a group of high schoolers from an African church to come to America and run our children's program for a week at our church?
Right.
Some people might think that's really cool. Yeah, let's do that. But other people would say, well, why? Like, why would we want to hand that over to them? Maybe they could help.
Right.
They could fit into what we're doing, but we wouldn't give them control over that ministry.
Right.
Right. So,
and it's never a permanent relationship. That's the other
right.
part of it. It's like we're the first thing I imagined for a second was, let's bring these new people in, but I'm not regarding the fact that, well, they're out next week. Yeah. And then we get a whole new set of strangers, right?
Yeah, right. If they kept
no investment.
There's another anthropologist. He talks about this. He studied short-term missions. His name is Bob Priest.
Good
he's
name.
At Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. He did his PhD in anthropology at
he's an atheist now.
At UC San Diego, I think, something like that. But he's not an atheist. Yeah. No. One of the metaphors that he said it's kind of like dogs and children walking around an art museum. Like this is a pretty harsh criticism.
Okay, yeah.
He said they see things and they can see what they see, but there's no understanding or appreciation for what they're doing. And he said, the children, there's possibility that you could teach a child some things and eventually they would appreciate the art in the art museum. But he says, a lot of times our short-term mission trips, it's like the dog walking around in an art museum. You see things, but you just don't really know what they are and you don't understand them, and you might make messes that other people have to clean up. And he's hoping that we get to a point in short-term missions where we do the type of education and preparation that's needed so that when people go on a short-term trip, then they can make a difference and they understand what's happening. Wow, I've been talking a lot. You haven't been asking any questions.
Well, this is what I'm curious about. Chris, what are we at for time?
28 and a half.
Okay, cool. So real quick, we've heard a lot about really the pitfalls, right, and kind of the dangers of what short-term ministry looks like. And we've had several years since that boom to hopefully kind of level out a little bit. What are some ways, just from your personal experience, that you can suggest to our friends of the podcast to maybe if they're interested in a short-term mission trip, what are some good things, or what are some valuable ways that, especially for us as ministers, right? Like I take a team of students a couple times a year to the same place, and that's the only place we go for that sake of the long-term relationship.
Oh, that's good.
And so what are some other things that maybe if somebody's watching or listening as a pastor that they can do, or what are some things they can do to help and make sure that they avoid some of the same mistakes that you have kind of informed us about tonight?
Right. So what I would say is make it your goal to not accomplish something on a short-term mission trip, but to build relationships with people.
And so that's like first and foremost.
First and foremost, yeah. And we did this when we were in the field. One of our supporting churches, we actually convinced them to go this route. We said, when you come over on a mission trip, we don't want you to do anything, especially on this first trip, We don't want you to do anything that you feel like you've done, like accomplishing a building or setting up a program. We want you to come over and go around and meet church leaders in their homes and pray with them in their homes, go to the church services, and visit the villages where these church leaders are working. That's it. Get to know what their names are, who their wives are, who their children are, build a relationship with them, eat meals with them. And they all loved it. The people on that first trip, they just loved it. They thought it was great. Enjoyed the experience, made some longer lasting relationships than other groups did, came back to the States, and then they're getting ready for next year's trip, and they said, this time we want to do something, though. I said, no, you didn't get it. This time we want to do something. But what's needed is a relationship. So what's needed in other parts of the world is an understanding that American Christians actually do care about them and are willing to be in a long-term relationship with them. And so you've got to find the right people to go on these trips that are willing to do that, right? And then the other thing is people going on the trips need to look at it as a way to revitalize their own churches in America. So what can we learn from this church movement in this other part of the world that maybe is growing faster than our own? What's going on there? What's God doing that we could learn from and bring back to our congregation? So that would be the next thing. So going to build a long-term relationship, looking at as an opportunity to learn and revitalize our own Christian community in the States. There's some general things I would say, like go with an organization that has a long-term relationship with people or has long-term folks on the field, and be willing to listen to the long-term folks who are there, or even be willing to place yourselves under the local national leadership and what they're doing. Don't come in and tell them what you want to do. And it's really easy for the national leadership to feel like they can't tell you what to do because you're bringing money and you're bringing stuff. Yeah. And so it's a really careful balance, because you might think that you're going in under them and what they want to have done, but in reality you're controlling it because you're bringing these funds, and so they're not willing to tell you no, right? And they're very agreeable to what you want to do. So while you're on the field as a short-term team, you want to spend time, talking to the leaders in the community. That's one of the other mistakes short-term teams make. They focus on children, and it's great. Children love to play, and spending time with children is wonderful. And there are a lot of places in the world where children, they need more attention. But if you want to make a longer-term difference in the community, you've got to talk to the adults and to the leaders and what sorts of things are going on in their lives and how they could see you working into the ministry that's going on.
So you're almost saying, like, the first few times you go, have zero expectation to do any wisdom imparting, right? And to other people, you just go as like a sponge, ready to just learn, be helpful wherever you're asked to help,
right?
And just like nothing else, really. I mean, no other intentions, no other ulterior motives.
And that can begin before you even go. Yeah. Short-term teams are often focused on in the preparation, like getting their passport and their shots, and what are some of the things we're going to experience that will be difficult. But what about learning or studying some of the history of that place?
Yeah.
Like, what's some of the political history in that place and some of the religious history of this place before you go? What about
when you have to bribe somebody? How much should you bribe?
What about finding someone? Let's say you're going to a certain part of the world, but there are immigrants in America who are from that place. What about inviting them to your church in your pre-trip orientation?
God, that's so brilliant.
And meet some people who already are from that part of the world and talk to them before you go.
Awesome.
Why not do that?
So awesome.
I think that's a great idea. And then while you're there, what happens is mission teams often will do, we're going to do work for these first 5 days, and then we're going to have 3 days of kind of like sightseeing, tourism, vacation stuff that we're going to do. And groups coming to Kenya, I always encourage it. You're maybe only going to come to Kenya once in your life. Go on a safari. Like, that's something that you should do. But how can you make that tourist time actual ministry? Like continuing
you can't.
the ministry instead of turning it off. You can.
Nope, not possible. Impossible.
No, it's possible.
So okay. So what's the one last piece of advice that you would want to impart to folks who are listening?
Oh gosh. Well, the only thing that I haven't really talked about is follow-up. So short-term teams that want to have a mission trip that has a lasting impact. When they come back to the States, there needs to be follow-up in the church where this group meets together to continue to reflect on the experience that they have. And they need to intentionally critically consider the representation that they're giving people in their church of the place where they've been. Mm-hmm. So if you arrived in Kenya and you're just taking pictures of all the people who live in these terrible situations, and then that's all you're showing in your church when you come back, I mean, tell some stories about what God's actually doing, right? What are the good things that are happening in this place? Everybody lives differently around the world, and that's kind of exotic, and we like to talk about that. But what are the great things that are happening that we can learn from? So focus on those things instead of the exotic differences.
Those poor people.
Those poor people. Which is what I think there are a lot of Kenyans looking at Americans today going, those poor people, you know. And that's the easy thing. It's easy to look at cultural difference and say, it's so terrible, it's awful that they have to live that way. And not getting past that. So get past it.
Get past it. Did you hear that? Get past
the exotic stuff.
Well, feel free to connect with us on all forms of social media. We're super grateful to you, Kip, for stopping by and for sharing just really years worth of insight and wisdom jam-packed into 30 minutes of discussion there.
Now nobody needs to take your classes.
Yeah, right.
So follow us on Twitter. We're at faithandwhatever. Find us at facebook.com/faithandwhatever. And if you have a question on a topic you'd like to see us cover on the show, feel free to connect with us at gmail.com. We're at faithandwhatever@gmail.com. Thanks so much for stopping by.